So greetings, everyone. Welcome to DevNetwork's Developer Week webinar series. I'm Patrick Gallagher, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this week's featured webinar presented by Apptio. Apptio is a current sponsor of DevNetwork events and webinars. Before we get started with speaker introductions, I have a few housekeeping items. First, I'd like to remind all of our attendees that live chat and Q&A is available during the session, and you can raise your hand in the chat or ask questions in the Q&A section of the webinar viewer. In the webinar viewer, on the right-hand side, you'll see the tabs for chat and Q&A, as well as handouts and polls. Questions will be answered at the end of the session in the Q&A section, so stay tuned for that. Also, second, we will have some handouts available. They are available right now, again, on the right-hand side of your viewer. You'll see handouts at the top, the tab, and there's a red dot. That means there's handouts ready and available for you. And finally, the webinar will be recorded and made available within 24 to 48 hours for additional viewing. So make sure to look for that email with the recorded webinar, and you can then share that with your coworkers or any other professionals. So today's webinar, entitled Delivering Cloud Financial Management at Scale, presented by Apptio. And our speakers today, first, Isaiah Rendorio, Product Marketing at Apptio. And then, as a second part of the presentation, Alex Hullah, Director of Cloud EMEA at Apptio, will be doing a demo. So get ready, and without further delay, Isaiah, take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Isaiah Rendorio. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Apptio Cloudability, our industry-leading cloud cost management and optimization product. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about delivering cloud financial management at scale. To set the stage, every industry today leverages the public cloud. The public cloud was introduced in 2007 and is no stranger to the enterprise audience. We find that organizations across every vertical incorporate the public cloud into their key strategies, whether that be oil and gas, financial services, insurance, military, education, whatever industry you may be in, chances are there are organizations who are already taking advantage of the public cloud. And when you look across these industries, we find that the one thing they have in common is they all have struggles around managing costs. For one thing, cloud spend is decentralized and siloed. Buying centers, which have traditionally sat with the procurement teams in IT and finance, have been pushed out to the edge where developers can deploy cloud resources without approval. Therefore, many organizations lack visibility in a single source of truth for their all-up spend. The next is pricing complexity. Many organizations we work with have custom pricing agreements with their CSPs stemming from the purchase of commitment-based products like reserved instances and savings plans. Oftentimes, these agreements make it harder to understand hourly costs. A lot of companies find themselves overwhelmed by unexplained pricing plans that offer many opportunities for discounts that can't be used. When it comes to data complexity, AWS has over 300,000 SKUs alone, and they release hundreds of new SKUs a year, different services, and different billing options. This is a difficult thing to track. Now, couple this with the fact that many organizations have monthly invoices in the hundreds of millions of line items long. It's easy to imagine how the majority of organizations struggle to do this at scale with spreadsheets alone. Then lastly, ineffective use of capital. Waste. The latest research indicates that organizations may be overspending on cloud services by 70% or more without a proper cloud financial management and governance process in place. And that's why Cloudability was created. Fundamentally, at Cloudability, we help organizations improve visibility where their cloud workloads reside across the business and across the organization, and then work to empower those teams and individuals to reconcile those workloads to ensure the best leverage of available discounts. We solve for the problems associated with imperfect tagging, sharing costs, understanding complicated business structures so that the consumers of cloud services can get the granular views and insights to control costs and govern spend. Our goal is really to accelerate the cycle you see here in front of you. It's really about making sure that you can be informed, optimize costs, plan around predictable levels of spending, and then operate to achieve those ongoing savings as opposed to one and done approaches. I'm going to go ahead and break down this wheel in front of you so you can understand each of its components. So just going over to the next slide, let's go ahead and start with the informed stage. Improving cloud financial management starts with being informed. You simply can't manage what you can't see, and organizations can drive huge wins quickly just by having accurate and timely cloud spend data to inventory those workloads, make sure that they're normalized for adjusted discounts, credits, and amortization. And from there, you can easily allocate those costs back to consumers to derive a trusted and defensible chargeback process. One of the advantages of Apptio Cloudability is the ability to integrate custom pricing and discounts immediately, not 10 or 14 days after months close, so that organizations can get their true cost to drive decisions. This doesn't just only provide a comprehensive understanding of the spend, it derives accountability through building trust and empowering your stakeholders to have accurate and actionable information that matches their understanding of cloud spend to their team and their roles. There's also the ability to benchmark cost across the organization to help see what organizations are driving optimal cloud financial management and where other organizations are struggling. Let's go on to the next slide. And again, this is a breakdown of how we drive this. The ability to establish that cost allocation strategy to make sure costs are going to the right place, integrate that custom pricing and discounting, provide a defensible showback chargeback process, and then establish a benchmark along the way. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you how this paid dividends to one of our retail customers, a supermarket chain using multiple cloud providers. They simply weren't getting the granularity they needed from their cloud bills and the supporting spreadsheet processes. And on top of that, the organization had challenges leveraging savings plans, and they really struggled to allocate costs back to their consumers. They specifically chose Cloudability for the metrics around flexible reporting, the dashboards and views, which allowed them to eliminate waste quickly and improve cost certainty. Within the first 90 days, they saved over $500,000 and went from zero reserved instance coverage to around 80%. From there, they can now pass those costs directly to those teams who are fully accountable for their budgets, and through this period of uncertainty, they could quickly associate and optimize their level of cloud spend associated with their call center costs, which obviously have increased through this period to support their customers, but allowing them to adjust their plans accordingly, whether that's the ability to ramp up or to ramp down and to right size. Moving on to the next slide, this is where we get into the levels of the optimization stage. So optimization simply is about only paying for the resources you need so that you can free up the capital to drive the business forward. Again, to a lot of organizations, resource optimization is what matters most, and it's probably why you're listening to this session. So as mentioned in the previous story, one of the ways you optimize is just to detect the anomalies, and that's a huge win for some of our customers. That identification of waste, what's been left on, and what can be turned off can account for a huge dividend. When we think about cloud waste all up, the latest research shows that this can be up to 30 to 35% for most organizations of what their cloud bill is annually, and these quick savings are often enough to fund and justify the purchase or where that quick ROI comes into play. Moving on to the next slide, once these workloads are inventoried and reconciled, we're able to help you centralize your commitments in the buying process and then provide you recommendations for both RIs and SPs through a unified experience that allows your consumers to make informed trade-off decisions and empower them to take action on those recommendations. Understanding the long-term implications, the ability to right-size workloads is done through Apptio Cloudability's ability to leverage trillions of hours of usage data, algorithms, and machine learning to continuously generate a ranked list of recommendations with explicit scores for both savings and risk, so you can run your cloud infrastructure with maximum efficiency. And then lastly, to take the guesswork out of migrating new workloads to clouds, organizations can specify a workload by entering their specific compute requirements And afterwards, Cloudability can identify candidate instances with sufficient disk, memory, and CPU capacity that this approach ensures that you're using the optimal instances for the workload across cloud providers, and check unused reserved instances to make sure you're paying the optimal price for a given workload. To further illustrate this, I can tell you how one of our travel agency customers, who's currently experiencing a significant drop in business due to worldwide travel restrictions, is getting the granularity and the visibility they need to cut costs fast. As you can imagine, every organization on the planet has been asked to identify where they can optimize costs. IT spend is not immune to that challenge. And when you think about the executive team's ability to say, where can we make cuts, and IT leaders being tasked to replan and forecast their budgets within a matter of days, that decrease in demand meant that cloud expenditure may not have been necessary to levels it once was prior. And so again, the ability for the leadership team to determine which services and which resources were mission critical allowed them to frame a narrative that said, where can we downsize and where can we get to a place where demand returns to its normal state, we can operate efficiently. By taking full advantage of Cloudability's optimization features, the organization was quickly able to save the money, identify over-provisioned resources to right-size, and then using the reports and dashboards generated, the teams were able to communicate exactly which cloud services were tied to those mission-critical functions, which could be cut or optimized. Now let's get into planning. And again, this is an element of being able to understand that based on prior usage, what is an optimal path forward to ensure the outcomes we need? So how do we not over-provision? How do we not spend more than we say we would? How do we get to a place where we improve our levels of predictability as we take this cloud journey? Then, organizations face a lot of challenges with budgeting and forecasting spend, and it's really cloud complexity that is driving this. So when the resources that make up cloud infrastructure are continuously changing, or the applications need more instances than you initially planned, and when unused instances are left running, it's no wonder organizations see considerable spend to plan variance. So on this slide, I want you to just imagine a world where you can actually track spend in real time, understanding time periods, understanding consumption, and understanding accountability in a single view so that you can predict where your spend is headed and then do something about it before it's too late. And this is a world that Apptio Cloudability customers live in. Their ability to set and define accounts and services that map to organizational and financial reporting structures through our curated dashboards and filtered views feature allows projects or team level budgets to be seen and allocated in a single view. This allows them to review budgets and cloud providers through a single pane of glass. Again, the centralization of where the workloads are and our ability to make informed decisions about right-sizing and optimizing those workloads. They can now track how they're trending and ensure that they stay within their budgets and use month-to-date analysis for an accurate view of the current month against the previous month's trends. And again, this allows them to quickly identify their biggest spend drivers and the variables associated with them. It's also important for them to be able to set notifications and alerts at intervals of their choosing so they can be informed of when they're on or off track to exceed that budget. Improving cost certainty is one of the biggest benefits our customers ascertain. And again, if they can reduce their budget variance by as much as 75%, with some organizations spending within 5% of their plan month over month, which again is part of that predictability. Now let me show you how one of our customers, a SaaS video infrastructure and coding company, was able to do this. And for starters, this organization simultaneously leverages all of the major cloud service providers and needed to address executive concerns about the increasing levels of cloud spend and the spend to plan variance that they were running into month over month. And they were really in search of a better way to monitor and control those costs and identified and selected Apptio Cloudability. And initially, they started simply just by shutting things off. It's eliminating those forgotten and underutilized dev and test instances to realize initial savings, going back to that idea of quick ROI we talked about, and then followed up with the right sizing recommendations and following the right commitment strategy in that optimized bucket. But really, where they're getting the most bang for their buck is using our business metrics feature, which allows them to map cloud costs against a business metric like customer growth to see how cloud costs impact their cost per customer goals. This allows them to make better decisions today about future outcomes. So, again, being able to tag cloud costs to a specific customer creates a common ground for finance and engineers who can sit down and make better decisions as they increase their tagging coverage and then hone in on what the teams are actually spending and then use that data to fuel better forecasting. It's an amazing story of what happens when everyone can operate on the same page. And again, using historical data to plan a better future is really what accurate forecasting and budgeting is about. And then last but not least, we'll talk about operations. We strongly recommend cloud cost optimization isn't just a one and done thing. Once you improve your ability to see and then optimize and plan, you can now institute a series of processes that allow you to achieve ongoing savings of 15% or more. And this is where the practices of cloud financial management get established and ultimately automated to drive more value for your organization. The value of this really rests in your ability to get the data to the cloud consumers that need it in the context that they need it in. Having IT finance on board with this, the business, all on the same page with spend and usage insights, and for over a decade, Apptio as a brand, as a company, has helped IT leaders develop this Rosetta Stone by shifting the dialogue from bytes, bits, feeds, and speeds into things like time and money and dollars, the things that the business understands and obviously fundamentally cares about. So this practice of technology business management, deployed within thousands of organizations worldwide, it has been used by CIOs to help teams communicate the cost, quality, and value of IT to their business partners so they can drive more innovation within the organization. Apptio Cloudability is no different in this regard. And this is really done through the business mappings I talked about, empowering organizations to automatically overlay a business structure on top of cloud spend that connects IT, finance, and line of business teams is really critical. So this business mappings is a rules-based engine that categorizes cloud spend to the specific taxonomy of the business, enabling organizations to optimize the unit economics of a given application, service, or business unit. So this enables full integration of IT operation tools, systems generated ERP, and CMDB cost center codes that are fully understood by humans and reports and dashboards that become more meaningful and more impactful. So with these mappings, finance, procurement teams simply don't need to understand EC2, EBS, or S3. They can work with cloud spend in terms of applications, product services, business units, anything that the business derives value from, and then develop the cloud cost KPIs that matter most to them so that they can drive optimal cloud financial management. And this is best told through the story of one of our streaming media companies who, as you can imagine, with all the change in the last couple of months, have hit all-time highs in terms of streaming. As a result of this, they've experienced enormous increases in demand for their video streaming services. Now, they leverage the scalability and the elasticity of cloud infrastructure to meet that demand, but ultimately, they needed to understand how this impacts their unit costs and ultimately their bottom line. And that sudden increase in demand had to have had a knock-on effect on cloud costs to support those streams. So with pressure to cut costs amidst this challenge we're all in, IT quickly needed to determine, are they experiencing rising cloud costs per stream, or if the increased cloud costs were simply a result of increased demand. And leveraging this business mapping feature, the company was able to calculate their average cost per stream over time. And they did this by leveraging multiple dimensions and comparing historical averages to current costs per stream. They're now able to show that their unit costs have remained flat. So again, the rising costs were a result of demand, and their cost of goods sold aren't affected. And this is one of the many examples of business metrics in action that we would love to have a richer conversation with you about. So as we wrap up this presentation, I just hope you found this very brief overview of Apptio Cloudability informative. For more information, please check out the Apptio website at apptio.com/cloudability.
Isaiah, thank you very much for that presentation. And now, Alex, I believe you're going to do a demo, correct?
Thank you very much. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Isaiah, for the great introduction there. So to put this in context and give you an idea of how Cloudability helps clients achieve a kind of workflow through these key steps around informing and understanding where we are today, optimizing that spending, helping us plan and predict effectively where we're going to be in the future, and driving effective operational processes that encourage engineering innovation in our organization, I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of the Cloudability platform. So right now, I'm signed into Cloudability as an administrative user. So this could be somebody from your Cloud Center of Excellence or your senior leadership team. The first thing I can see is our $43 million we've spent on cloud so far this year across all of the cloud providers we're working with. This could be Azure, AWS, or GCP. And I can see not only how this is changing day over day, but also month over month. And actually using some of the underlying machine learning models that Cloudability provides natively, we also see what we are predicted to spend by the end of this month based on our patterns of usage and how we are behaving, which is really critical to actually helping us understand where we're going to be within that kind of forecast and our goals. As well as providing these kind of high level metrics, it's also possible to continue to break that down into the details around what's driving that change in spending. So by individual services, projects, or applications, where do I need to focus my time? What services am I using more of? And where can I actually make a difference with my focus? You can, because Cloudability is using the raw data provided by the cloud providers at the maximum granularity and with the full history, so we never summarize any of that data and we never throw it away. It means you can actually always drill down to the exact line item detail. So in this example, what are my most expensive resources? Which teams are using them? Where do I need to be focusing, for those big ticket items to help me kind of adjust that cloud spending? As well as giving this kind of dashboard overview of exactly where we are, we can also tailor that to our end users' needs and with an entirely drag and drop experience. So actually, I don't need to actually be able to work with kind of scripting or Power BI or other types of other visualization or scripting tooling to be able to understand or change this. It is all done on a kind of a drag and drop when what you see is what you get interface. So it's very easy for me to tailor this experience to exactly the information I need. Now, one of the things Isaiah touched on earlier on is actually the ability to align that cloud spending to the kind of areas where we are utilizing it. And this can sometimes be a challenge with cloud spending because it's isolated away from our other systems of record. So when we start to look at what that cloud supply chain looks like, we can see, what are we purchasing? Is it on demand? Is it reserved? Is it spot? Is it kind of usage? Is it taxes or marketplace fees? What are the types of things we're spending money on? And we can break that down further into, is it storage or instance time or networking bandwidth, those kind of high level classifications, ultimately down to the individual. Okay, it's Azure Compute or it's Amazon EC2 or RDS, the individual building block that we're using. And it typically stops there. And what we allow you to do with Cloudability is to actually use some of that metadata that lives elsewhere in the organization. So things like CMDBs, service or application catalogs, and overlay that on top of your cloud billing and usage data to help us align it to how we're organizationally structured. To give you an example, actually, I'm going to add in here our application. Also, I'm going to add in our business units that are consuming those applications. So now we can add additional context to this cloud supply chain to not only say, okay, this is my Azure Compute or my Amazon EC2 usage, but actually what am I using it for? So I can see how much of that compute and networking and assigned disk is supporting my desktop or my web or my mobile application. And I can see which of these are being used by different parts of the organization. So we can see that 3 of those applications, it's used by our sales operations team versus our web application that's predominantly used by our engineering team. And it helps us start to build up that view of that cloud native supply chain. So not just what we're buying, but what are we using it for? And actually who is, which part of the business is actually getting the benefit or utilizing that service. Now, this is great to give us an overview of how the cloud supply chain sticks together. But one of the key things around having informing effective visibility for the whole organization is that information should not just stay centrally. We need an effective way to disseminate that information out to the individual owners of these services and the users of cloud who control these resources and are provisioning these new capabilities. So with that in mind, instead of you looking at this from an administrative type overview, what I'm going to do is actually pretend I'm working with Cloudability as just an individual application owner, and I'll select our mobile application here. So what Cloudability does is it actually knows who I am, and it knows what I'm responsible for, and it's going to automatically personalize the entire experience to just the data and just the areas of responsibility I have. So I'm not looking at our whole application estate now. I'm looking at just my application and just the building blocks that go into that. And I can actually see we're using some Azure Document DB here, which I didn't think was supporting my application. Show me actually exactly where we're using that. And with a couple of clicks, we can go from an entire overview of our cloud spending right down into that line item detail that we get from the billing provider. So the individual billing and usage to help us understand where we're using services that we weren't expecting or where we are over provisioned in certain areas. Now, this concept of personalization applies to the entire Cloudability experience. So whether it's the dashboards that we were looking at earlier, whether it's the notifications, the calls to action, all of that is designed to be tailored to give the appropriate communication to the right end user at the right point in time. So here we're actually taking a look now at that same content, that same layout that I was looking at earlier. I haven't had to build a new dashboard or report for this, but actually now I'm just looking at the 5 million in spending that I'm directly responsible for as the mobile application owner. I can see my own daily pulse, my own personalized estimate of where I'm going to be at the end of the month. We can see this particular app runs entirely in Microsoft Azure, and I can see what's driving the changes or the most expensive resources specifically within my environment. This type of visibility is incredibly impactful when we think of the information our engineering teams and our application owners already have from things like Splunk and Grafana that tend to focus on more operational health of the application or workload, and combining that with cost and usage data allows us to make the right engineering decisions and trade-offs when we're choosing differing types of either kind of base level services or value-added services that the cloud providers offer. Now, when we think of optimization, we tend to think of kind of two areas, one of which is kind of how we're purchasing public cloud. So things like reservations, savings plans, committed use discounts, making sure that we are actually kind of utilizing those to the best of our ability. But the other side of that is also then optimizing how we utilize cloud. So actually making sure we're deploying the right type of engineering resources that are the best fit for our cloud environment. Cloudability helps with this by actually kind of automating the usage of not only that cost and usage data, but also the performance and monitoring data that is natively available with things like CloudWatch, Azure Performance Monitor, or Stackdriver to allow us to make machine learning based suggestions on what are the most appropriate machine types and instances that we should be utilizing to best fit our workload. So let's take a look at that. By doing it, but Cloudability is designed to help us inform specifically correct types of instances based on quite a dramatically changing environment. So it's quite common for cloud providers to launch new machine types, new services at a moment's notice. So we need to be able to make sure we are able to leverage those to make sure that we find the best fit without huge amounts of manual analysis to help us understand how we can effectively utilize this within our environment. If you can bear with me 1 second, team, while my internet connection decides from Europe, it's decided it's having a bit of a moment. This type of information effectively needs to be disseminated to those engineering teams and application owners. It's no good having that from a kind of a centralized overview perspective, because actually, as kind of a cloud center of excellence, we don't necessarily have that direct control or that knowledge over how our applications or workloads are performing and how they're likely to behave on differing machine types. So actually, this is why we actually provide that personalized list of suggestions based on the individual application we're using. And we look across things like CPU, memory, disk, and network utilization to allow us to understand what are the different shapes of machine types that might best fit this workload or this type of capability. So in this example, we're looking at an R5D 4 extra large, and we can see the patterns of usage based on maximum values that we see over a given 10 or 30-day window. So that blue line represents our maximum utilization of that resource. The red line represents the capacity we're currently paying for, and the yellow line represents the capacity we would have with the recommendation Cloudability is suggesting. So we can see and actually understand how close we are to the limits for each environment. You'll also notice that we're looking across the entire scope of recommendation options. So even if it may be kind of cross architecture, cross family, to give your engineers the full scope of what is particularly possible. And we also score all of these different recommendations with an associated risk rating. So you'll see here the recommendation to move from this R5D 4XL for my production ECS cluster instance. We're suggesting to move to an M5AD 4XL, and we can see the headroom that we're going to have in each of the main constraints. And the main adjustment we're making is to reduce the amount of memory, but we're not trimming particularly close to any limits here. Now, if I wanted to be a little bit more aggressive about this, if this is, say, a development environment or a batch processing environment or a testing environment, and actually I want to kind of go for a bigger saving opportunity, and I'm okay with actually tolerating a certain amount of slowdown or a certain amount of clipping as we max out that environment very occasionally, I might look for one of these higher risk recommendation options. And we can see specifically actually what are we kind of limiting in this recommendation. So to save an extra 46% or another $300 a month, we'll actually see that we're reducing our CPU footprint in half. So very occasionally, we're actually going to max out the capacity of this machine. But actually, depending on the workload and the task this machine is doing, that may be okay. And it's important to actually give this engineering context and information to those engineering teams and application owners so they can make those right trade-off decisions with the knowledge of how their applications and platforms behave. Another element of this is actually then being able to make sure we can forecast and plan effectively. So making sure that not only are we able to see where we are predicted to be in public cloud spending, and not based on our patterns of past behavior, and understanding from an overall perspective, and also how that breaks down on a service by service level, so we can understand how our changes in use from individual services are likely to affect that forecast going forward. As well as, again, doing this from a centralized point of view, the key thing is also being able to federate out or disseminate those forecasts out to our end kind of business users. So those actually, let's say if I grab an example for our mobile application owner, being able to forecast individually for that particular application, exactly how I'm predicted to spend and how I'm performing against my budget. So I can see specifically, am I within target? And actually, if I grab our budget here, I can see, actually, you know what, the impact of that right sizing activity we did earlier is really taking effect. And we're actually kind of way under where we need to be right now. And we can see the rates of change from the individual services we're using. But also Cloudability is constantly monitoring this. So we don't need our application owners and engineering owners to be constantly checking dashboards to make sure that they're within kind of their agreed tolerances. Cloudability, you'll notice, is actually projecting where we're likely to land at the end of the month. And we can see the difference to our budget. If something happens in my environment that means that budget estimate is going to exceed what I've committed, what I'm budgeting for this month, Cloudability will actually notify me, and it will notify me when I'm predicted to overspend. So I've still got time to actually sign in, understand what happened, and potentially course correct or make adjustments to bring that spending back into line. And it's just one of a number of examples where Cloudability will reach out and notify your end users when we're predicted to spend more than we expected, when unusual events have happened in our environment and our spending pattern has changed significantly, when we're in breach of certain compliance or governance rules that means we need to take corrective action, whether that's around adjustments to metadata and tagging quality, or adjustments to where we've deployed certain resources. Cloudability is designed to make it as simple as possible for your engineers to get the information they need at their fingertips and be notified when there are actions you need them to take. Now, Isaiah also touched on how we effectively operationalize this. And to close out, effective operationalization of this comes in a couple of key areas. First is actually around what we call our benchmarking scorecards capability. So this is designed at a high level to help us understand how we are performing relative to other organizations that use cloud in a similar way with a similar kind of state on that adoption curve as us. We break this down into 4 key metrics. First is our pricing score, so understanding how effectively we purchase cloud. Our tagging score, so based on the metadata we've identified as important to our organization, how complete are we? How good, how valid are we? How good are we at making sure we're capturing the correct information to help us identify what resources are being used for what and where? Our elasticity score allows us to understand how effectively we're using the flexibility that public cloud provides. So scaling up and scaling down production environments in line with customer demand, or switching on and switching off development and testing environments outside of office hours. And our final element is that right sizing score. So making sure we are picking the right shape of computing, of disk, of storage horsepower from the cloud providers that matches the demand we see from our application or our workload. The final element I wanted to leave you with was actually then around thinking around the North Star metrics that matter for cloud. And I'm going to share with you a particular widget here that has been really helpful for some of our subscription companies. And this is focused on the kind of the North Star metrics for that workload or capability. So if we think of if I switch out of our mobile owner, because I'm after our view for our organization here, if we think of the types of KPIs that tend to drive business value, it's not necessarily what we spent in the cloud. It's how many users did we have? How many transactions did we process? How many new sales did we make? And here we're looking at an example for a company that's aligning that cloud spend to the number of daily active users they have on their platform. This might seem fairly simplistic at first glance, but what it helps us understand is that when cloud spend changes, and actually I see big increases in my spending, I have to first understand, okay, have I changed something in my platform or in the way we're provisioning this particular capability that means it's become less efficient to run? Or actually, have we seen an increase in usage? Is the platform scaling up to support increased customer demand or increased end user usage? And are we scaling up efficiently? So as we're scaling up, do I see that cost per user coming down? Or in some cases, do I see that cost per user going up? In which case, I want to identify which component is my bottleneck and focus my engineering and architectural minds on that to help resolve that particular bottleneck. And with that, we will kind of pause there and open up for Q&A. So thank you very much, everyone.
Alex, great. Thank you very much for that great presentation, that great demo. As Alex just mentioned, there are some questions that are in the Q&A. There is still time for anybody who wants to add in a question. You can add in a question. You also, an offer has just popped up on the screen. If you're interested in getting some more information about Cloudability, make sure you hit the Get Started button on that offer. But let's get to the Q&A, Alex. So the first question is, and if you want to go over to Q&A, is how have new technologies impacted financial management?
Right. Okay. So one of the themes that we've seen coming up a lot is actually the increase in kind of containerization and quite popularly Kubernetes-based kind of platforms in kind of driving greater density in the cloud usage. Now, it's fantastic from an operational perspective. It gets us lots of extra kind of resilience and lots of extra efficiency, but it tends to be a little bit of a nightmare from a visibility point of view. So one of the things that I've found a lot of clients coming to Cloudability to recently is actually to help understand what's happening within that containerized environment. So Cloudability allows those end users to actually break down not only the cost of the cluster, but also what's happening within that cluster. What are the different microservices that are deployed in the different namespaces? Who's utilizing what, which is particularly challenging in a shared cluster environment. But also, quite interestingly, I've started to see it with a few clients actually starting to track the version increments as we deploy new versions of our microservice, and understanding what's the impact of that code change. Have we made our particular containerized service more lightweight or more heavyweight with a particular code adjustment that we've made? So you can really use this for very effective kind of micro optimization as well.
Great. Thank you very much for that great answer. So the next question, what are the most complex cost allocation structures you've seen?
Ooh, let's think about this. So with some of our clients who've been working in cloud for a long time, they've kind of fallen victim to some of the evolution or the differences in the best practices we've had from the cloud providers as the space has evolved. I'm thinking of a couple of particular clients where it's they followed, say, the best practice from the cloud provider at the time to use one big account and then figure out who owns what using just tagging. So we tag the resources, and that denotes ownership and the function. They kind of quickly realized that that didn't scale, I think kind of in line with actually some of the changes in the industry as well. And so they moved to then an account-based model. So actually we're going to have an account vending machine structure, and we'll vend a new account for each owner or for each application that wants to provision something. And so they're now in this mixed mode where they've got a massive production account with loads of things that are of varying tagging quality, and also then a whole set of individual linked accounts where they're using their different ownership model. They use Cloudability to bring those two worlds together. So regardless of which ownership model I'm in and which kind of structure of governance I've grown up in, they can have consistent rules and consistent visibility that applies across the entire organization. So they're breaking down that big shared account, and also giving those end users the individual accounts they have direct visibility into, along with all of the ability to then set budgets, provide notifications and calls to action across the entire cloud spending. And this is, I would say, this gets complicated even more for clients who have multiple cloud providers and have different governance models per cloud provider. So having a way to centralize this into a common taxonomy, I feel it can be super helpful for kind of getting the right behavior through the organization.
Actually, I have a backup question or an additional question to that. Out of, let's say, out of 10 companies, what are we talking about the number of companies that are still dealing with shared account issues? Is 5 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 3 out of 10? Where is the industry?
I wish it was less, to be honest with you. But I tend to find that this kind of mixed model turns up about 50% of the time, where it's we wanted to get into cloud for a while, but we started either with this set of governance rules and we've changed, or part of our organization started without us knowing, and they didn't have any governance rules, or they defined their own governance rules, and now we need to align around a common strategy. And so this kind of ability, I think one of the things I find super helpful with this is the ability to actually use business logic to define, okay, this is what we should look like. We appreciate we don't look like it right now, but actually let's start to use this kind of automation to not only identify where we're not in the pattern that we expect to be, but also drive that kind of automated communication to the stakeholders who are out of compliance that, hey, this is not what we expect anymore. We need to start making adjustments here. And you can also use that as a first part of things like a tag or terminate strategy. So it can be a little bit carrot and stick, but you can effectively give them that kind of notification grace period for whether it's 7, 14 days, whatever the time period is up to the organization, and then actually transition that into kind of part of the automation that you have in place to start automatically enforcing that compliance. So you've got kind of a bit of both worlds going on there to help drive the right behaviors from the organization.
Great. Thank you for that. And the last question, which I think would flow directly from what we were just discussing, the last question that's on the list right here is, where have companies found the biggest savings? And just before you finish that or answer that question, just as a note for everybody, still please put in some questions if you have any in the Q&A or in the chat, so we can do it, but we will wrap up here in a couple moments. But Alex, can you answer that question? Where have companies found the biggest savings?
So there's no, I would have to say there's no one size fits all, because depending on how your organization has adopted cloud, there are going to be differing behaviors everywhere. So some of the common themes I see is, in some cases it's focused around right sizing and kind of sizing the non-standard types of resource. Because I think when everyone hears the word right sizing, they always think about, oh, it's EC2, or my compute machine, or my Azure compute, or my Google compute instances. There's so much more to it than that, because actually a lot of the differing services we get from the cloud providers have their own kind of sizing qualities. One of the things that I found particularly eye-opening recently with a client was actually looking into the kind of the utilization they had around S3 resources. So they had worked on the assumption that they were putting a lot of data into things like Amazon Glacier, and assumed they didn't really need it. And so it was great. That's the cheapest way to keep it. It turns out when we started looking at how they were using those Glacier resources, that okay, you're actually paying an awful lot more for these access requests, because you're hitting these Glacier long-term archives much more frequently than you think, and it's costing you a lot more than just running it in a regular storage tier. So looking at things like RDS, looking at things like Elasticache, or some of these other services actually does yield normally a pretty significant benefit. I mean, the other side of that is also making sure we've got effective elasticity policies in place. So understanding, where do we need to have resources running 24/7, where don't we, and making sure we're providing the right visibility so teams are naturally incented to figure out what scaling pattern works best for them.
Got it. Well, I just wanted to let everybody know that it's going to be our last question for the day. Unless somebody has another one, they can throw it in immediately. I'm going to just do a couple of housekeeping items just to give some people a little bit of extra time. Just as a side note, there is handouts available. So on the right-hand side of your viewer, up at the top, under handouts, there should be a red dot. If you haven't clicked on it yet, make sure you grab the handouts that Apptio has put. I do want to say thank you, Alex, to you and Isaiah for a great presentation today, and sponsorship of today's online learning session. As I noted before, this session is being recorded and will be available for rewatching in about 24 to 48 hours, or our attendees can then forward it on to their coworkers if they want to check it out as well. The recording will also be added to the Dev Network and Developer Week content archive, and that can be found at devnetwork.com or developerweek.com. So just want to thank everybody for participating. Alex, thank you very much for your time today. Some great answers. Isaiah, and just want to say thank you to everybody. Have a great and safe day, and thanks a lot.
Thank you all.